everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Pirkei Avos, the Ethics of the Fathers with Rabbi Chaim Coffman in Israel. It's always a joy to be with Rabbi Coffman. These classes mean so much to me, especially after a long wearing week. Rabbi Coffman's message always restores focus on ethics, and I love it. So let's just tune right in and see how the rabbi's doing today. Rabbi Coffman, always good to be with you, sir. How's everything in Israel? And I think we're still on 2:5.
We are still chapter 2, Mishnah 5. Hopefully my voice is going to hold out here. Yeah, it's been a whirlwind week. Two brisses, 2 circumcisions, 2 grandson, this week. Yeah. So, past few weeks been a little bit, it's a little bit crazy definitely for good things. It's always good. Always good. I always say you see the continuity, right? The next generation. And, also, by us, by the Orthodox, we're the only ones doing it right. So we're the only ones able to pass it down to the next generation. Again, another link in the chain, right? Going back to Mount Sinai. Obviously a tremendous thing, because everybody, that's why most people get buried, in general, because, they want to have, somebody come visit them, right? I asked my Rebbe once, why don't more people get cremated? Makes a lot more sense, cheaper, maybe better for the environment. I don't know. He can stick that on the mantle. Here he is. He's still with us. But my Rebbe answered that people want to have a remembrance. They want people to come. They want people to come visit. So to speak. After they're gone. But it's a pretty amazing thing. I always say when Torah works unbelievably. When it fails, it also fails, unbelievably. But let's get back to when it works. When it works, it's tremendous, no question. There's a lot of what they say in Hebrew. There's a lot of regesh. There's a lot of feeling. There's a lot of, there's a lot of warmth when you see, when you see it, people going in the right direction, especially in your own family. So we are
joy.
Yeah, sorry, it doesn't mean we don't have what to pray for. We got plenty of what to pray for also, no question. Definitely no question about that. So we are in the second chapter of the 5th Mishnah. I think we're going to be here for a while. But because there is always a lot to talk about, even if I don't go off topic. All right, so...
No politics!
We are right. Again, as you would say, well, you can't go wrong with ethics. That's only if that's only if you adhere to them. That's only if you abide by them. Right. And sometimes, in general, just, throw this out there that's, just like something I saw, when I was in South America that was absolutely forbidden and was misleading, et cetera. And Rabbi said, you got to call it in. Right. It's kashrus issue. Right. And essentially that cost me my job. Right. So even if you stand up for Torah and that is the right thing to do, you're going to, a person will say, well, if I lost my job, right? If a person lost their job, they're thinking, what's the goodness over here? What good can come out of it, right? Nothing should come bad out of Torah. But sometimes sticking up for Torah, right? You have to be moser nefesh. You have to be willing to self-sacrifice. Even to the extent, and certainly as a Jew, even as an extent that you might have to give up your life for it, right? Rather than transgress by the big 3. Right, by murder, immorality, or idolatry. Right, Jew and non-Jew comes up to you and says, I want you to bow down to this guy in the stick. Right, or show the fat guy, Mr. Buddha himself. They say bow down or die. Probably not going to call him fatso, but they'll say bow down or die. You have to be willing to die. Now, we're not looking for that. We're not interested in that. But if that's what it comes down to, right? If I'll give one other example, if a boss wants certain information, and the information he wants is Lashon Hara. The Chofetz Chaim states clear in the laws of Lashon Hara, you have to give up your job. You're not allowed. If he says, listen, if you don't give me this information, you're going to lose your job. Right? You have to give up your job. Right? If it's Lashon Hara, you're not allowed to give it over. So you're going to say, but how did somebody, if they keep Torah mitzvahs, why in this case do they lose? They don't lose. Because they're going to get it somewhere else. God's going to take care of them somewhere else. This isn't the only job, right? They want you to be immoral, right? If they want you to, They want you to look the other way, for certain things, when it may be fraud or stealing or whatever, that you're not allowed to do, even if you don't sign off on it, right? That you're not allowed to do because you know what's going on, right? I had the same thing. I knew what was going on. Everyone was afraid of somebody. Rabbi said, you got to call it in, right? You can't have somebody misrepresent, then they're going to think they're drinking something that's kosher when it's not, right? I didn't go as far as I should have, whatever, but in the end, it cost me, right? It definitely cost me. Yeah. So the question
Always
is,
does.
Okay, but isn't that your obligation? Isn't that your obligation to stand up for Torah, even if it costs you your job, right? Now, you're not gonna sue the owner and say, hey, this is against religion, right? Like they'll say, what happened in the early 1900s. If you don't work on Shabbos, you don't get paid, right? So a lot of people ended up desecrating Shabbos because they had no money, right? There were other people that stayed strong, looked for other work, might have suffered tremendously, but the kids came out all right, right? But there are tremendous tests. Tremendous tests. I could be making a ton of money. It's totally illegal, right? 100% illegal. And, you may not get caught, right? Let's just say, right? You're not going to get caught. You're not the one, holding the bag of bones over here. Someone else is taking responsibility. Someone else is taking responsibility. You say, well, it's not my fault, right? I'm not doing anything illegal over here. They take responsibility. Yeah, but you're benefiting. You're benefiting from the illegality. Right? I was involved in such a thing, and then eventually the place got shut down, but that had nothing to do with me, right? The illegality, I wasn't doing anything illegal, right? Other people weren't necessarily doing anything. I mean, some people were, right? But there were a lot of people that weren't, right? Regardless, anyway, they got shut down. But people who are doing things on the up and up, obviously not going to get prosecuted. No one else got prosecuted over there. So, I've spoken about this a lot. It's good, it's a good topic. It has nothing to do with what we're speaking about now, right? But in general, there's an idea of integrity, right? When it comes to conversion, I've spoken about this a lot. Rabbis don't have integrity. Rabbinical courts don't have integrity. I'm not saying everybody. I'm not saying across the board. You need integrity, right? You need to do things according to the way the Torah wants, right? You can't be a bystander over here, even if it may cost you your job. The Rabbi Chaim says you have to give up your job, right? If the boss says, tell me this information or you're fired. There's no question over here. If you're not allowed to give over the information, it's forbidden, right? 100%, it's going to be forbidden. So you're going to say, where's the justice? You're trying to make a living. You're trying to be honest. So you say, where's the justice? You know what? God taking away my livelihood? Okay, he'll provide somewhere else. Right? He runs the world. He's got a big bank. Right? He's the big boss. He's the big boss. So I'm only working for one person. He's the only one who help me make a living. Certainly not. Right? The person looks the other way. And they have no integrity. The punishment's much more severe. Punishment, they could themselves say, well, it's not really me. I'm not doing anything wrong. It's not really a big deal. Etc. They have to live with it. That's not necessarily true. That is not necessarily true. If a person is signing off on it, yeah, you're going to be taking a task. You 100% will be taking a task. If you're not, right, in this case for me, that had nothing to do with me at all. This thing happened in Chile. It had nothing to do with me. Right? But in the end, someone was selling something or given rabbinical supervision of something that was problematic. Right? It had nothing to do with me. Right? But the problem is, most people know I can't stand fraud. I can't stand people who lie. Right? And, this person not only was lying to the public. I don't care what he does at his house. It's not my problem. You want to bring in non-kosher food, non-kosher wine, feed it to your wife and your kids. Okay, that's your issue. I could care less about it. You want to give that over to everybody else? You don't want to say it's 100% kosher. There are no issues. That's a different problem, right? You should find a different occupation because you are defrauding other people of what they're eating. Again, you want to do it in your own house? Do it in your own house. Right, but you want to say this is legitimately kosher and it's okay. When it's not, that's something else. Right? That is something else. Right? It's okay. In that sense, I ruffled a lot of feathers. People were unhappy, and I lost my job because of it. Right? So I didn't ask the question, like what's going on over here, whatever. I was reporting that because there was fraud. And there were people who knew about it, didn't do anything. Right? That annoyed me to no end. Okay. I was stuck in a foreign country 2 months. 2 months after I had this job, I was supposed to be there for 2 years. Okay. So I had to, work other things out. Instead I ended up leaving 4 months later. Regardless of all that, it was I can't say why I was there for any reason at all. Didn't make any sense. Right? But I was still rip roaring mad the fact that someone could have that kind of power and not care. Because we call that in the vernacular, that's called extortion. Right? And someone's going to stand up to the bully. And everyone was afraid to stand up to the bully. And I wasn't afraid to stand up to the bully. It cost me. It cost me. Right? But in the end, in the end, it just made me stronger in different ways. Because, I saw what's out there. I'm not saying everybody's like this. Right? But I saw what's out there. And, you can be a rabbi, you can be called rabbi, people can worship you, they can love you, they can this and that, you can still be a fraud. You can still be very well.
Hey, coming out of Christianity, you would not believe how much of that I saw.
No, I understand, but, I was a little bit, naive, in certain ways. And, I was involved in the world of outreach. And I saw that was fraudulent in different ways. Not everybody, certainly. By certain people. I got involved in the world of conversion. That's 10 times worse. In a lot of different ways. Spoken about it a lot. In many, many different ways. I always ask the question, which I should never ask, but I always ask the question, where in the world is integrity? Why is money more important than integrity and in truth? And it bothers me because the ones where you want to do the right thing, you got fraudulent people out there and make them look bad. And they say, oh, you the real deal? Are you Orthodox? I'm like, I hope so. So is my Rebbe, right? It's crazy. It's absolutely insane. But you know what? The Talmud says, we live in a lama de shikra. We live in a world of falsehood. That's what it is. What looks true is false. What false is true. Right? And you can't make some of this stuff up either. Right? So, integrity is extremely important no matter what you do. Whether it's a religious practice, whether it's in business, I used an example once that, if someone wanted to do something fraudulent and his Rebbe kept asking him, like, why do you think this is permissible? And he said, Rebbe, that's business. Yeah, to mislead people is business. Yeah, but the Torah says, Davar sheker terchak. Says you're not allowed to lie. You have to stay away from falsehood. Oh, what do you do with that? Rebbe, that's business. It's a joke, right? It's a big time joke.
I know, but I've saw so much of it in life, Rabbi.
Religious people defrauding people, right? Not everybody, of course, right? But that makes a desecration of God's name, right? Keep in mind, the desecration of God's name, you have to suffer in this world. You have to go through repentance. You have to go through Yom Kippur, and you have to die. If you don't die, you don't get the atonement. Even if you do all the other things for 50 years, you don't get the atonement until you die. That's how bad desecration of God's name is. Yeah, you wanted to say something before?
Oh, no, I've saw it go on. I mean, I spent a lifetime career in business, and all I can say is, yeah, I've seen cutthroat, swimming with the sharks kind of, sales and money grabbing. It's terrible. And, it's made me just see how precious ethics are and integrity.
Right. People say, well, that's business. Well, if it's Torah prohibition, that's not. It's forbidden. But people don't care. People just want to make more money. They want to squash other people, and that's it. Right? So back to our Mishnah. You're not allowed, Hillel said, don't separate for yourself from the community. That we hit. That we discussed. And do not believe in yourself until the day you die. Right? That's more or less we're holding. Right? We spoke about Yochanan Kohen Gadol. We're going to see him in a different context. Right? The fact that Yochanan, the high priest, was high priest for 80 years. That means he came in and out of the Holy of Holies every year unscathed. And then became a heretic after 80 years, which, again, we're going to see it a little bit in a different context. Comes along Rabbeinu Yonah. Rabbeinu Yonah of Gerundi says like this. He says we can look at this Mishnah one of two ways. We can look at this aspect of the Mishnah one of two ways. The first way is, even if we're doing the right thing, even if we're going in God's ways, person shouldn't think they are so righteous. They shouldn't say, well, I've been successful against my evil inclination before, I've broken it, therefore I have nothing to worry about, I have nothing to fear. Right? But the evil inclination is what we call, he's our adversary. Right? He works very hard to trap us, causes us to sin. That's his job. That's exactly what he's supposed to do. And we have to beat it. So even if we beat it once and we beat it twice, don't think the evil inclination doesn't come back. Don't think he's not going to still, wage a war. Yeah.
Rabbi, I had somebody on the other day on a YouTube chat, ask, well, does that mean we have to be perfect? Perfect, especially B'nai Noach. I know that the nation of Israel, was told to be holy as Hashem is holy. People seem to not understand or carry a weight of perfection that is unhuman.
So for non-Jews, let's keep in mind. Yeah, let's keep in mind that for non-Jews, what they have to keep is anything that is universal according to the Torah. Right? That makes sense according to the Torah. The laws of Lashon Hara don't apply to them. Because there are different things in the laws of Lashon Hara, even though I would say it's a moral imperative not to speak badly against others, but the reality is it doesn't apply to them. Right? So now you have to keep in mind, right? Jews, how does it work by Jews? Everyone's got an evil inclination. If we do the wrong thing, there's payback. Right? It's payback in this world, could be payback in the next world, right? Etc. If it's something between man and man, we have to ask them for forgiveness. Right? If, let's say, somebody stole from someone else. Someone stole from someone else, not only do you have to return the money, but you have to ask them for forgiveness. It's not enough just to return the money. Right? And I have to go through Yom Kippur. If it's between man and God, then depending on what it is, I have an obligation to repent. Right? I have to go through Yom Kippur. I have to have remorse. I have to have regret. I have to say I'm never going to do it again. I have to make a plan. I'm never going to do it again. Right? So now what that does is not only does it stop my punishment, right, but it's going to turn what I did into a mitzvah. By non-Jews, it stops the punishment. In other words, repentance will stop the punishment, but we don't turn what they did into a mitzvah, right? There's a difference. There's definitely a difference. Where do we see it, obviously? We see it by the book of Jonah. We see that Jonah goes to the city of Nineveh, and who's the king of Nineveh? Pharaoh is the king of Nineveh, and he gets everyone to repent. All the animals wear sackcloth. All this, what happens? They don't get punished. Right? In other words, the wrath of God stops. That's why Jonah doesn't want to go, because it's going to make the Jewish people look bad. Say, look at all these non-Jews. They're the ones who repent. You're Jews. They don't even repent. They don't feel guilty. Right? So what happened? Over there by Nineveh? What happened? It stopped them from being punished. That's all it did. Stopped them from being punished. Now, so now you asked, but a non-Jew's supposed to be perfect? No. See, even if we have bad thoughts, Jews, but we don't act on it, 95% of all bad thoughts a Jew has, not necessarily going to get punished for. Right? Certain things you may get punished for. Idolatry, immorality, right? Even if I don't act on them. So I have to be careful with my thoughts. Now, what about a non-Jew? Does the non-Jew have to be careful with his thoughts, even if he doesn't act on it? Maybe we say no. Maybe they're not held to that high of a standard. Right? But see, Coffman would say, what about a moral imperative? Isn't it a good thing to control your thoughts? Right? Is it a good thing not to speak Lashon Hara, even if I don't have an obligation? But what's the priority here? We have to remember, anything a non-Jew is commanded to keep, that makes sense according to the Noahide law. If you don't keep it, you're liable for the death penalty. Right? That's how severe it is. You will be 100% liable for the death penalty. What's the reason? The reason is because it's obvious. These are things that are 100% obvious that a non-Jew that a non-Jew has to keep. Now, I've gotten this question before. What about someone who grew up as a Hindu in India? What about someone who grew up, I don't know, doing voodoo in some, dark place of Africa? I don't know, the middle of nowhere, whatever it is. And they grew up with voodoo. People grew up with other things. These poor people can be liable for death penalty. You're right. You're 100% right. Right? I had somebody said a number of times that I don't understand. Why are they liable? Why should they be liable? It's not fair. Right? It's not, why would God punish them like that? Well, don't you know you're not allowed to take an animal's heart out and eat the animal's heart as part of a voodoo sacrifice? Because but you were brought up that way. Yeah, but God gave you a brain.
And all, yeah.
Right? Unless you're mentally damaged, right? Or sorry, you're mentally challenged. Right? If you were to ask most thinking people, you don't have to have 120 IQ. Right? You can have a 75 IQ. If you were to ask, is this cruelty to animals? In general, anyone who's a leftist will say yes. Others will say no, it's part of a ritual service. Right? What's the problem? They'll say animal sacrifice is problematic. Right? But again, forget about that for a second and ask yourself, if part of a ritual process, right? Again, it's a bad example, but let's say it would be, part of the process would be to skin the animal alive. While he's alive, you rip the skin off the animal. Isn't that causing pain to the animal? Say you don't understand. We need the skin. It's if you say it's part of the sacrificial service, it's part of voodoo, right? They don't have much of a claim because they're going to claim it's part of the ritual, right? It's part of the ritual. And then they'll come back and say, well, don't the Jews do animal sacrifices? Why isn't that cruel? First of all, we're not being cruel to the animal. God says, there's a mitzvah to sacrifice it when there is a mitzvah to do so. Whether it's a it depends on the sacrifice. Whether it's a burnt offering, the sin offering, the guilt offering, any of these things, right? But someone growing up in Timbuktu, in the middle of nowhere, right? God gave him a brain. He gave him a brain. If he gave him a brain, doesn't it mean they should really use it to do the right thing? So I'll tell you the following medrash, right? Following medrash with a fisherman. Fisherman gets upstairs and God says, hey, how come you didn't keep my laws? Right? The whole question, what are you going to be asked first? If you're going to be asked first, were you honest in business? That's a good one for you. Right? If you're honest in business, low blow.
Go CFL.
Or if you learned Torah. Right? So God will say, well, did you learn Torah? What do you mean? He says you didn't give me a brain. Right? You didn't give me a good enough brain to learn Torah. So God asked him, okay, what'd you do? How'd you make a living? So what does the person say? So listen, I took these nets, these intricate nets, and I tied them and I I threw them out in the water, and I did all kinds of other things. That's how I trap fish. Right? And that's how I was able to make a living. So God says, really? That's so interesting. He says, I bet you the same God who gave you brains to be a fisherman, to make a living doing that, probably gave you the same brains to learn Torah also. Maybe not to watch CFL, but to learn Torah also. Right? He gave you that brain. So if he gave you that brain, then you have no excuses because this is universal. Right? This is universal according to the Torah. If it's universal according to the Torah, you have no complaints at all. You got brainwashed by your society. You got brainwashed by your family, everybody around you. Okay, I can feel bad for that. But isn't it true? Most people listening right now who have come out of Christianity, came out of paganism, came out of something or other, whatever it was. Right. Why did they come out of it? Because they saw, in my language, it was a travesty of a mockery of a sham. They saw it was a lie. They saw it was false. If they saw it was a lie and they saw it was false, then obviously they're searching for truth, right? The Talmud says, if you want to go in the right direction, God will help you. If you don't want to go in the right direction, God won't stop you, right? So if you have a 50, 75 IQ, this doesn't make any sense, right? What's the idea of immaculate conception? What's this idea? God himself can turn himself into a frog, right? He can manifest himself in a human form if God represents the entire universe. Right? At all times, whatever that means. That's why when we get, in 2 weeks, we're going to read about the building of the tabernacle. And God says, Exodus chapter 25, verse 8, I want you to make this box. I want you to make this Mishkan, this tabernacle. I want to dwell amongst you. God's infinite. How do you put an infinite being in a box? So you're going to say, Rabbi, that's easy. It's Kabbalah 101. You're right. It's Kabbalah 101. And how does God constrict, put himself in a box, coming down all the spiritual world, right? The 10 spiritual worlds. God comes to the 9th, the 8th, the 7th, the 6th. I don't even know how this works. And he puts himself in a box. Does that make any sense? No, because God is infinite. So if God is infinite, we got 150 million questions on Christianity. But Christianity and all the pagans say, can't question. I'm not allowed to question. See, I drink a little bit of caffeine. I'm not allowed to question. If I be allowed to question, you got to say, you got to have faith. You got to have faith. Come on, where's Prince? Oh, sorry, died. Yeah, I got to have faith. Yeah, but it doesn't make sense. If it doesn't make sense, then God's going to show you the way. God will help you and show you the way. That's why most people are listening right now, because they've come out of this. They understand it's a travesty of a mockery sham. But what's the hardest part? Hardest part is, if I don't believe in JC, I'm going to fry in hell forever. And that's kind of hard, because you don't want to be on the wrong side, right? You don't want to be on the wrong side, after 120 years, right? So comes along over here, you're going to say, well, don't people have a brain? What's going on over here? And you know what? The sad reality is most people want fantasy, right? Most people want fantasy. That's what they want. They want to be left alone. Religion is the opiate of the masses. We're not going to listen to rabbis. We're not going to listen to anyone. And that's it. We're going to do exactly what we want. Why? Because we enjoy it, right? Case in point. Tomorrow, right? Sunday. Super Sunday, right? Not Super CFL Sunday. Super Sunday. Why is it Super Sunday? Day of the Super Bowl, right? So now, even though it's COVID, right, not going to be so many people in the stands, however they're going to do it, it's the most watched game in the year outside of the World Cup, right? Americans getting into soccer a little bit over the years, right, or football, whatever you want to call it, but the whole rest of the world, when it comes to the World Cup, everybody's watching. Everybody in the world, right? You got millions, billions of people watching this game. Now, someone's going to say, okay, even if your team's not in it, it's a whole day affair, right? You got the pregame show. You get a whole day. You get a whole day to go through this game. And usually the game doesn't, usually it's a boring game. Usually someone is winning outright. It's not really that close, usually. So not even a good game, right? But most people are going to watch it, right? Why? Because that's what they do. It's enjoyable. Just because it's enjoyable doesn't mean it's good for me. Right? These things are a waste of time, right? 100% waste of time, right? I mentioned that Rabbeinu Yonah says that in the Gates of Repentance, right? He speaks about, one of the things he speaks about, the 4 groups of people that will not see God's presence in the next world. One of them is flatterers. One of them people speak Lashon Hara. There are others that lie, etc. So he brings down over there that wasting time when I could have learned Torah, right? I think it's Rabbi Yonah brings this down to double check, but it brings down that if a person had the opportunity to learn Torah, when they have an opportunity to learn Torah, they don't, and they waste their time. I'm not saying when they're under onus, but they waste their time. Right? So it's brought down over there that when a person wastes time, he's liable for a death penalty. The Mishnah in Pirkei Avos later, and we're going to clarify this, but we're going to get there probably in the next 50 years. The Mishnah says if a person's learning with somebody else, and they say, oh, what a wonderful tree, what a beautiful tree, liable for a death penalty. Right? What do you mean? They're learning Torah. But in the middle of learning Torah, the person says, wow, God's creation, unbelievable. Why is it liable for a death penalty? And why is it if a person wastes time when they could have learned, why is it's worse than the big 3 that a Jew has to give up their life for? Idolatry, immorality, and murder. Why is it worse? Those things God can, if a person repents, person properly does tshuva, then God can forgive him. The Jerusalem Talmud says, but if a person had the opportunity to learn and he doesn't, God does not look the other way. Right? It's considered worse than the other three.
It's like turning
your back. Not only that, but if he's learning Torah, we're going to clarify in a second. If he's learning Torah with someone else, and he's learning, he says, what a beautiful tree, but he's praising God's creation. He says, wow, I can see Saturn. Saturn's very low. Let's take a look at Saturn very quickly. The beautiful ring, then we'll go back to learning. Why is it liable for a death penalty? Because when a person's learning with someone else, forget about politics, forget about anything else, forget about letting your mind wander. You have to focus on the task at hand. You have to focus on what you're learning, whatever it is, whether it's the 5 books of Moses, Chumash, right? Whether it's Tanakh, whether it's Talmud, whether it's Jewish philosophy, whether it's the laws of Lashon Hara, you're not supposed to get distracted, even if you praise God. Right? We're going to speak about this, one day in the future, in the long future, because I think it's further down, well further down. But in general, if a person's learning, can't get distracted. You shouldn't get distracted. Shouldn't be speaking about politics. Shouldn't be speaking about football. Shouldn't speak about anything except what you're getting at. Now, if you go off on a tangent, that doesn't really have to do with what you're doing, but it's within Torah. It's one thing. If you're speaking about things that have no relationship whatsoever over here, right? And God says you're going. What you're saying is that this is more important than God. You are taking God out of the picture. You are saying, you know what? God, you take a break over here. I'm gonna speak about something else, and I'm gonna take a break from you, and you'll deal with it. God's gonna say, okay, it's a good thing you're learning Torah, right? It's a tremendous thing, but who gives you the right? Who gives you the right to push me aside and say politics is more important than me? Speaking about the virus, speaking about the vaccine, whatever, that's more important than me, right? You're taking God, you're pushing him out. You're totally pushing him out when you have an opportunity to learn. So that's wasting time when I could have learned. And God says, I don't understand. Politics is more important than me. The CFL is more important than me, of course. That's what a person, even if you don't say it directly, right? That's essentially what you're saying, right? So now, the $1 million question is going to be, is a non-Jew held up to that standard, right? A Jew will be held up to that standard, right? But by a non-Jew, they have an obligation to learn Torah. They have an obligation to learn what applies to them, right? They have an obligation to learn what applies to them. Does that mean they have to learn Torah all day long? No, right? We cut them a lot of slack. As long as they're not doing something egregious, something that goes against the Noahide laws, they want to do other things. Fine. They want to work 5 minutes a day, 10 minutes a day, an hour a day. We're not going to put a limit on it. They can do what they want. Jews, different ballgame, right? A totally different ballgame. But I would say that, when it comes to something like this, and people will take issue. People certainly will take issue because it hits a raw nerve. And the raw nerve is, you're going to tell me 270 million people are going to watch all these famous commercials that people are paying $1 million for a half a minute, right?
15 seconds.
Right? They're paying for all these crazy commercials, right? Because most people see this one game a year, right? That's why they're paying, 5, 10, a billion times more than they normally would, because they're getting all this exposure, right? Coca-Cola, light beer, right? Whatever it is. Oh, I'm watching the game. I'll have a light beer. I'll go have some Coke. Whatever it is, because more people per capita are watching this game, one day a year. So I ask you the following question: Jew or non-Jew? Whatever I do, does this enhance by being closer to God, or does it not? So you're gonna say, Rabbi, it doesn't matter. It's football. I'm not watching cheerleaders. I'm not watching anything else, right? No immorality, no nothing. What's the problem, right? What's the problem? It's a game, right? So maybe we can say for a Jew, the worst problem is it's just a waste of time, right? That may be the worst problem. But what if you're not going to learn anyway? What if you're not going to learn anyway? If you're learning bad things, I agree, it's a lot worse. If you're not necessarily learning bad things, for argument's sake, the best we can say is it's just a waste of time. Now, I would ask the following question. And the following question is, does this benefit me or not? People say, yes, it does. I enjoy watching. It benefits me. It'll make me a better person. Okay, I can argue. I can argue against that in a lot of different ways. It doesn't really matter. But for a non-Jew, maybe it doesn't apply, right? Do they have an obligation to learn all day? No. Do they have an obligation to have fixed time for learning? No. They have an obligation to learn what applies to them. And if they can learn it all in one day, good. If they spread it over time, there's plenty what to learn. You'll never stop.
Sure.
Right? But in general, when it comes to learning, they'll see it makes them stronger. Right? It makes them more aware. Right? The whole purpose of what we're doing over here, besides making fun of the CFL, is the point that there are a lot of things that may seem obvious. Right? That may seem obvious, but there's a lot of detail. Right? There's a tremendous amount of detail that some things may apply more to non-Jews. There may be things that that not. Right? But when you look at this, you look at the Mishnah says, don't believe in yourself until the day you die. Right? So, how does this apply to a non-Jew? Right? So we're talking about the evil inclination. Does a non-Jew have an evil inclination? He has an evil inclination. Right? They have an evil inclination. Does it work the same way as a Jew? Not exactly. It's a lot more complicated issue. If you read the book Derech Hashem, he speaks about it, quite a bit. What goes on with the soul, what goes on with our actions, how it gets judged, upstairs, comes back down. Now, non-Jews not exactly the same way. It's a whole complicated thing according to Kabbalah. I'm not going to go into, right? But the point is, there are many things that apply to non-Jews. Even people would say, you know what, this doesn't apply. And even if it doesn't, question is it a moral imperative, right? I did an hour show on Tanakh Talk about a moral imperative when it comes to Noahites. There are a lot of things that may not apply, right? They may not apply, but it's not a good thing for a non-Jew to do. Speaking Lashon Hara is a good example, right?
Improper.
Speaking badly against someone else may not apply, may 100% not apply to a non-Jew. And someone will tell me, what are you worried about? It's the way of the world. This is what people do. Okay. Even if that's true, you want to tell me it doesn't apply. Is it a good thing for my soul? Right? For a Jew, for sure it's bad. For a non-Jew, the question is, does this apply and to what extent? And the answer is, it really doesn't apply. But if you go around doing things, what could it lead to? What is Lashon Hara usually? A lie. Person speaks badly against someone else. They're not telling the truth. They're exaggerating. Right? They inherit firsthand. They make things up. They add things. But Lashon Hara also is on if it's true. Right? The vast majority of cases are where it's not true. Right? So, doesn't the Torah say not allowed to lie? Right? It says, we just mentioned before, Midvar Sheker Tircha. I am not allowed to lie. If I'm not allowed to lie, and it's forbidden, well, does that apply to a non-Jew also? Certainly does. Right? Does it apply exactly the same? May not apply exactly the same. Right? But a non-Jew also shouldn't lie. A non-Jew also shouldn't be around, other people that are doing things wrong, because in essence, we mentioned this once before, which freaked a lot of people out, and that is, even if someone does a transgression, why? We're going to speak about evil people in a second. Why aren't you allowed to hang out with people that go against the Torah, that go against the mitzvahs? Because even if you don't do it, you're hanging out with them. You don't rebuke them, even if they're not going to listen. Right? Even if they're not going to listen, you're guilty by association. In other words, you're hanging out with these people. You say, listen, I'm not doing drugs. I'm not stealing. This has nothing to do with me. But you're hanging out with them. You're going to say, I'm not going to learn from their bad things. That may be true, may not be true. But how come you didn't rebuke them? You should have rebuked them even if they're not going to listen. Right? And even if they're not going to listen, it affects you. Right? Because you're not a choir boy over here. Because you're hanging out with the wrong people. So if you're hanging out with the wrong people and they're doing the wrong thing and you didn't rebuke them, some of the commentaries say, even if you didn't do it, Rabbeinu Yonah, one of them, brings down the gates of repentance, you are guilty by association. Now someone's going to say, but I didn't do it. I had nothing to do with it. Right? In my case, right? I'll use myself as an example. right? I didn't sell non-kosher wine. I didn't have someone who didn't keep Shabbos who was watching the wine, which makes it you can't drink it. I didn't do that, but I and everybody else knows the person who gave authority to do it knows it, but they're too chicken liver to do anything about it. Right? They're too scared about their own thing. The person's got power. Maybe it's a mafia. Whatever it is. I don't care if this person's listening. Let him listen. He's also a fraud. Call him out anytime. Point is, and that's not Lashon Hara because the person is leading other people astray. It's a mitzvah to call them out. But in general, something like that, if you know that information, you cannot sit back. And when I asked my Rebbe that, when I said, what do I do? People are afraid of this person, this and that. He said, doesn't matter. He says, you have to call it in. You have to say it's forbidden because he's misleading people. Now, again, I didn't take it as far as I could have, right? But I did call it in. 100% I did call it in. And, I got the brunt of it. And people in private, patted me on the back, said a great thing you did, but we can't back you in public. Because they're afraid of this guy, right? So it says, we can't back you in public, but it's a great thing you did, right? It's kind of like a Three Stooges thing, right? So, they're all in the straight line. It's okay, who's going to volunteer? And two of them take 2 steps back. It's like, oh, great, you volunteered. It's like, what a great thing, but we can't back you publicly, right? So, but in the end, this person is misleading people. It's got rabbinic supervision on the bottles of wine. They're selling it all over the world. Jews can't drink it. Non-Jews drink it as much as they want. But if it's got rabbinic supervision, who's going to drink it? Jews. And if Jews are going to drink it, that's called fraud. Capital F. Right? That's called fraud. So when I told my Rebbe what happened and everything else, I said, you made me way too strong. And he said, yeah, I wish I did. He's like, yeah, I wish I did. He said, but he said he didn't even bat an eyelash. I mean, I didn't have on a video call, but he said straight as he said it straight as a whistle. Boom. He said, you have to call it in. He said, doesn't matter what your concern is. If you know this to be true, you cannot sit on the sidelines because you are 100%, this person's misleading people. Even if you're not involved, but right? In general, unless, even if there's a threat of death, I would still think you have an obligation to do it, right? You have an absolute, maybe go into witness protection, whatever it is, right? But you have an obligation because the person is misleading. He's misleading other people. Now, in my case, as I said, by integrity, I don't care what this person does in his house. You want to call that kosher wine? You want to sell, you want to give it to your kids? You want to give it to your family? That's your problem. You want to put it out there for the masses, and you want to say it's kosher when it's really not, and people really know it's problematic, but no one else knows. You got to call that in, right? That you got to call that in. Now, I paid a price for that, but in the end, I do it a little bit differently next time. I take it as far as I needed to take it, right? But this person has to be put on their knees over here, right? This person has to say, "Well, did you send this person who wasn't Shomer Shabbos?" And what's he going to do? He's going to lie. That's what he's going to do. And this person shook down the person. He shook down the person, right? I never sent you when you didn't keep Shabbos, right? Because I heard it from the other person's mouth. He said, "You know what happened to me? You know what this person said to me?" He said, "You caused it." He said, "You're the one who caused it." I said, "But he's putting rabbinic supervision on something that if you don't keep Shabbos in public, you have the status of a non-Jew. A non-Jew, no offense to any non-Jews listening, cannot watch wine. They cannot watch kosher wine, even if nothing's added to it, right? That has the status of non-kosher wine. So how can he do it? He didn't know any better, but the person shook him down, right? That's how bad it was. He says, I'm very upset with you. I said, be upset. You can 100% be upset, but what the person did was wrong, and he used you, right? He 100% used you, and he's giving over something saying it's kosher when it's not. And if you know that to be true, you cannot sit by the sidelines and watch.
Right.
Regardless of what the repercussions are. And I was stuck in a foreign country. Not only that, they wanted me to sign a letter saying, okay, this is what you did. And now we are relieving you of your job, we are not going to pay you until you sign this deposition saying you're not going to speak against any rabbis in the community. Now, supposedly, the person who's doing this is quote unquote Orthodox and a rabbi, right? He's a joke and he's a fraud, right? And God's going to take care of him, whether in this world or the next. But so I sat there and I said, this is extortion. I said, this is extortion 101. And he said, it doesn't really matter. He said, you're not getting paid unless you sign this, right? We will not pay you compensation unless you sign this. I took the thing and I ripped it up and I threw it in his face. Well, I didn't rip it up. I threw it in his face, and then I ended up signing. My Rebbe told me you sign under duress. You tell two witnesses if you can ever go against them in court or whatever, right? But you sign, in front of two witnesses. I don't want to go into the legality of it, whatever. But you sign under, you tell them you sign it under duress. And that's what you do. And I lambasted this guy. We totally lambasted this guy. And they were very happy getting me out of the country. They made sure, beyond the shadow of a doubt, we're going to get this guy out of the country.
Got the friendly foot.
Yeah. So you wanted to say something before?
Well, yeah, Rabbi, I just, on the other side of the coin, and I don't mean to do this all the time, it's just, I don't like to be somebody who's always looking out for wrong in others. I think that there's something malevolent about that. But I get if somebody's going to be in harm or something is being done, that it behooves us to actually step up and do something about it. But I mean, I've seen people go in the opposite extreme where they're always running around. Everybody's under their microscope as if they're somebody that's telling everybody else what they shouldn't be doing. I mean, being truly human is being able to the way the Hebrew people transmit, the beauty of Torah.
Keep in mind one thing. If you're a person of leadership, you got to be 100% squeaky clean. You have to do things you wouldn't even normally do in order that people see you that you're squeaky clean, right? So the Torah says we are a light to nations, right? We're a light into the nations. Being a light into the nations means you're not allowed to push and lie. You're not allowed to lie. You're not allowed to deceive, right? You're not allowed to do this. You're held to a higher standard, right? Somebody misled somebody, and they came back, and then how could you do this? You're an Orthodox Jew. And he said, why put Orthodox Jews on such a high pedestal? That's stupid. That person should have been flogged and feathered, tarred and feathered for making such a stupid statement. That is a desecration of God's name, right? 100%. So we're out there, for better or for worse. We Orthodox Jews are out there, right? So now if you tell me I'm going to write a headline, I want more Noahites to watch. I want more Jew wannabes to watch. We're going to say, dog bites man. We're going to put up a banner, dog bites man. Who's coming? Nobody's not interesting. But if you put up the banner and say, man bites dog, oh, man bites dog, that's already a great banner, right? That's what you're going to say. Wow, man bites dog. That's not so normal, right? So I gave that as an example. Spoke at a convention doing Jewish outreach. And Friday night, so there's a rabbinic panel discussion. And the panel discussion was, if you see an Orthodox Jew do something wrong in public, read it in the newspaper, right? What do you do? What do you do? So I was the third speaker out of the fourth, or maybe I was the last speaker. I think 3 out of 4. The first 2 speakers took everything I wanted to say. Every last thing that I had prepared to say, right? So we'd spoken the night before, and we said that we're going to condemn the action, not the person, right? That was really what was the gist of most of it. And then, as I got up to speak, I was like, what in the world am I going to say? I'm never normally at a shortage for words, but this was like, if they ever ask you to speak, make sure you speak first. That's the first thing you learn out. But the first thing I said was exactly this. Dog bites man, nobody cares. Man bites dog, that's a story. Right? Now, are most Orthodox Jews, they do things wrong in business or whatever? No. Right? There are a lot of people, hopefully, on the up and up, and they're doing the right thing. Are there unscrupulous individuals that make us look bad, that are Orthodox, quote unquote? I wouldn't say they're Orthodox, but let's say, they commit fraud and steal and do other things, 100%. Right? But why does that make noise? Why does that, why does that make news? It makes news because it's not the norm. right? The norm is, most Orthodox Jews hopefully are on the up and up. Someone gets caught doing something, okay, right? It's definitely wrong, right? Whatever it is, and they're going to pay the price. But there's a bigger price. The bigger price is the desecration of God's name, and it doesn't matter. We're out there. People see us all the time, and if we're doing the wrong thing, right? Someone asked me the other day. Yeah, I'll give a good example. There was a funeral, right, for one of the Torah giants here. There were actually 4 great rabbis died within a day and a half, right? There were 3 rabbis died in one day. 3, Torah giants, of this generation, passed away. And they're older. One was 99, one was 98, one was 90. Doesn't matter. Anytime a righteous person dies, certainly on the same day, that's bad, right? Because they're one of the last links to the chain, to the previous generation. But even so, what were the pictures of? Funeral, thousands of people, no masks, no social distancing, etc. So somebody said, oh, I saw this. I don't know where they saw it. Wherever they saw it, they said, oh, you were at this funeral. I said, no. I said, I didn't go because I'm not going anywhere. I go shopping. I go to a few places. I go to pray. I go to my house. That's it. I've gotten 1 vaccine. I'm waiting for the other one. Right, next week I'll get the other one. This week. But I said to this person, well, you realize as well, there are protests in front of the Prime Minister's house, in front of the Prime Minister's office, tens of thousands of people, right? Also, no masks, no social distancing. So I said, if you're going to condemn one, you have to condemn both. The person agreed, right? But there are other people say, oh, that's not fair. That's not right. Look at these Orthodox Jews. They're spreading it. What about these secular Jews, for goodness sakes? Doesn't matter if it's outside. And here it was warm. Right here, it was like 15 degrees Celsius, like 60 degrees. Right? The weather was warm. Even so, no social distancing, no mask. You hold the mask, you don't hold the mask. We're not getting into that. Right? That's the point is, I understand why it's such a big funeral. You're talking about one of the Torah giants. Right? But how does it look to everyone else?
Right.
And you know what? A lot of people don't care. Right? Even at the beginning of COVID, there was a huge funeral. There was a huge funeral in New York. Now, they had permission, as far as I understood, they had permission from the police. They did have permission from the police, and the police reneged on it at the last minute. Right now, they would have come and asked me, even though it was a big Rebbe, if they would have asked me, I would have said, make it small. Make it really small. You're at the height of this thing. We're already looking bad because statistics are up the gazoo of how many Orthodox Jews are getting it, and they're already claiming we're spreading it. Forget about demographics, anything else. Well, it's anti-Semitism. Do not egg them on. Do not egg them on, even if the police give you permission. Right? So at the last second, the police took away permission. Unbelievable desecration of God's name. But you know what? People don't care. people don't care. They just don't care. It doesn't make sense. Right? And I've seen people write this in different ways, but they come up with the same thing. And that is, there's so many things we take on ourselves. Stringencies, that we wouldn't go against. We'd fight it like the plague, no pun intended. We fight it like to no tomorrow. And why over here doesn't anybody care? Why doesn't anybody care? We've been in lockdown for 3 weeks. Yeah. So the statistics have been 8,000 cases a day for 6 million people. Right? 9 million people in Israel. Right? There have been 9 million cases a day. With the lockdown, that's been a real lockdown, but let's say, with this lockdown, went down to 5,000, and now it's back up. And 2 million people have got the first shot, right? 1 million people have both shots. So the thing is so unbelievably contagious, still doesn't make sense. Well, you say it doesn't make sense because it's not really holding by the lockdown, whatever, but I still don't get it. People getting sick and people are dying, right? It's not a simple thing, right? We're wearing masks to make sure other people don't get it. 70% of it is because we're looking out for someone else. But even without going into all that, you want to say it's a fraud and it's a scam and not so many people are dying by it anyway, and the statistics are inflated and all that. It doesn't matter. Nobody wants to get it, right? Because essentially, I was talking to someone the other day, and essentially it's like playing Russian roulette, right? A kid could get it, they could die. You're going to say, what's the probability? Very, very, very small. Someone between the ages of 20 and 50, very, very, very small, they're going to die, right? But God's made examples, right? There was somebody that died that was like in their late 30s in New York about 6-7 months ago, more, and the person had no health problems, died in 2 days. So you're going to tell me most people are going to die, right, if they're over the age of 60. I get it, right? Those are the most of the statistics, even if the statistics are inflated, right? It doesn't matter. But I can promise you, nobody wants it, right? Deep down, nobody wants to get it, even if you know you'll survive it. Because I know people have had it, and they're still suffering from it. Different aspects of it. Someone's got back problems from it, someone's got other issues from it. 6-8 months later, they're still not the same. Someone told me they can't learn, they still can't learn very well because the brain is still foggy from it. Right? So the bottom line is, whatever a person wants to hold, I don't really care. I'm not really interested. Right? But the bottom line is you are playing Russian roulette. Right? Even if it's a very small percentage of who get it, you don't want to be the one to get it. Even if you tell me, I got it, nothing happened. Okay. Right? Someone else got it, nothing happened to them. They lost sense of smell, sense of taste. Nothing really happened. But if you would, pinpoint, if you get people into a corner, right, and you say, is this something I want? Is even if you're going to overcome it, even if it's 0.0001, a thousandth of a percent, or even more, does it really matter? You want to play Russian roulette? I don't think people want to play Russian roulette. Even if they want everything to be open, everything back to normal, I don't think most people want to get it. And I think, in my language, why are people so lax about it? Because I think they're stupid. They can believe in conspiracy theories or whatever. I don't think people are using their brains. Because other things they would never want. They would never want to be exposed to. Even if you tell me the percentage is small, right? Now, so how do you explain this over here? That's my only answer. I don't have another answer. There are people that are very, very careful and still get it, right? But nobody wants it. So why are people more careful? It's a catch-22. It's a total catch-22. Nobody wants it. People are playing Russian roulette, right? It doesn't make any sense to me at all. And people are still dying, right? If you tell me, okay, 70% have got it, got the vaccine, herd immunity, people going back to normal, it's one thing, right? But we're not there. Certainly in the States, it's going to take them a long time to get there, right? Here in Israel, hopefully next few months we'll get there. But even so, why aren't people being careful when they be careful with 10 other things, 20 other things, right? They don't believe in it. They think it's a conspiracy. Not many people dying from it, dying from other things, whatever it is, right? Whatever it is, nobody wants to play Russian roulette over here. So therefore, we're going to be careful what we do, right? Everything we have to be careful. So if we're out there, right? I just read an article earlier that someone was saying that on a flight from Israel to America, there were these Orthodox Jews on the plane, and these Orthodox Jews were praying, which can happen. Certainly on a plane when the sun comes up, whatever. But most of these people aren't wearing masks. They weren't wearing masks, and people were terrified. What? Praying to God without a mask is more important than guarding other people's lives? That's a tremendous desecration of God's name. That's what it is. Because they're not going to say, these secular Jews. They look like Orthodox Jews, 100%. Right? So even if they're wrong, even if it's a conspiracy, even if none of this exists, doesn't it make us look bad? It makes us look bad.
Of course.
Right? But what's their conclusion? Their conclusion is I have a right to pray. I don't care what you think. I don't care what you think. Right? But when let's forget about COVID. If you're out there, you cut somebody off on the road, right? You're not paying attention, whatever, you're driving like a maniac, you're in a rush, doesn't matter. What gives you the right to cut someone off? They're going to look at you as an Orthodox Jew, they're going to shred you. Oh, is this what the Torah says? And if this is what the Torah says, and you don't abide by it, why do I have to abide by it as a Jew? Why should I have to keep it? Now, that's wrong. Right? I know someone said, well, I don't steal. This person got caught by, doing fraud or whatever. I don't steal. So therefore, I don't have to keep Torah mitzvahs because look what other people do. And you know what? God's going to say, what are you, an idiot? I don't care what other people do. You have an obligation to be squeaky clean. You have an obligation to be a Jew. You have an obligation to keep mitzvahs. That's called passing the buck. That's called a third and long, i.e. a punt. That's what it is. That's essentially what it is. And it makes us look bad. Makes us look tremendously bad, because it's going to say, oh, these Orthodox Jews, they do this and they do the other thing. But they're supposed to do what God says. So why aren't they doing it? We're our own worst enemy. 100%, we're our own worst enemy. And we don't have an answer over here. We absolutely don't have an answer over here. Yeah, they don't understand. They don't know what Torah is. You cut someone off. What's your excuse? Well, you don't understand. I was in a hurry. But you're putting someone's life in danger by driving like a maniac. How are you allowed to do that? I was in a hurry.
Oh,
You
so
know,
hard.
I'm in the store. Someone pushes you. They're in a hurry to get to the cash register. What does that have to do with knocking me over? Or whatever. Pushing me to the side. What does that have to do with anything? You say, 1 second, you say, excuse me, it's one thing. But again, we're held to a higher standard.
Yeah.
Non-Jews, even as Noahites, may not be held to that standard. Right? They may not know the difference between you and anybody else, whether you're a Christian or whoever. Right? Jews themselves, we ourselves, for better or for worse, we have to be squeaky clean. We have to, even if we're out there, even if there are certain things that wouldn't necessarily be, something that's bad in general, but if someone looks at it as something that's bad, right, and you do it, then that's bad, right? Then that may be called a desecration of God's name. Yeah, question.
Well, Rabbi, you talked about you're bumping into somebody and all this stuff, and the point is, in those cases, there's a physical action, there's an actual action. But out here in this world, we see a lot more where fear provokes a situation when no action has in fact happened, and we see this more and more. They're afraid this might happen, so they are now proactive, bumping into, their lives are train wrecks out there. They're literally wrecking balls in the open world, causing havoc because they're afraid. Well, they think they have the right, and they keep going forward, and they're afraid. They use fear as a hammer, and I think they're in the wrong side of the fence, and it's different when you're getting across the ethic that if the Jewish people in fact do something, people magnify it. But when they don't do something, and imagine those that are fearful of the Jewish nation, like you hear a lot with the conspiracy theorists, blame, and they're afraid, and it causes them to do this action. But I see this out in the world here a lot, that it's that motivation of fear that incorrectly triggers them to provoke a situation rather than, in fact, an action of
excuse. It's an excuse for anti-Semitism. I don't think there's any question. But if they, they're not looking at demographics. Remember, most Orthodox Jews live in small communities or bigger communities, and everyone's on top of the other.
Yeah.
Everyone's on top of the other. So where are the majority cases of COVID coming from? Person's house. They say, oh, what are you doing? Praying in the synagogue, right? Praying in the synagogue. How many people get it? I saw months ago a statistic. How many people get it from synagogues? 4%. Right? 10% was coming from schools. Yeah, 7 that they spread it. It's being spread through synagogue. 10% was, I think, was schools, right? That makes sense, to a certain extent. But where's the other 90% coming from? If one person gets it in your house, most people are going to get it. In your own house, not because you're out there. One person got it, and then it runs rampant. So if a person's in a synagogue, you're right. One person gets it, they're in close contact, etc. Other people can get it, but it's about demographics. It's not just, oh, we're not doing our part. I mean, for goodness sakes, you saw all the riots took place in the States last summer. You saw all the political rallies. No one's saying anything about that. Social distancing, that's First Right Amendment. I can do it, I can do what I want. I have a right to protest. I have a right to destroy someone's business. I can do all these different things, right? Someone will say, well, they're outside. You didn't see a significant spike. But what's the difference? Right? Why is that permitted on the first Ryan Amendment, right? But, if people want to pray, that's forbidden. Right? Why? They say they're inside, they're close together, this is being outside. Whatever. A lot of different excuses, right? But that's what they are, right? It's a what do you call it? Double-edged sword over here. You can't accuse on one way and then say the other way is okay, right? It's either across the board it's bad, or across the board it's okay. You can't say, well, we're going to single you out, but these people are upset. These people are okay. Right? That's why so many people are upset with Cuomo, right? His president was crazy. Didn't make any sense. He was lying all kinds of other things, right? People in close quarters. Oh, synagogues, churches, no, you can't have people come. That didn't make any sense logically, right? And, the Supreme Court overruled them, which they should have, right? Which they absolutely should have, because it didn't make sense. Right, but we're our own worst enemy. We're out there. People see us. So we have to be extra careful. 100% we have to be extra careful. Because if we're not extra careful, this is exactly what happens. And people are going to be jumping up and down. Look at these Orthodox Jews. Tens of thousands of people at this funeral. Doesn't matter who the funeral's for. Doesn't matter what it means and all that. What do they see? No masks, no social distancing. Right? Do they say the same thing about people protesting against the prime minister? I don't think so. Not exactly the same. Right? If they complain about both, good. If they complain about one against the other, then this is double standard. Right? Totally double standard. So back over here, we mentioned that the evil inclination works very hard, cause a person to sin. Now, the person's going to say, well, I'm not learning all day. So therefore, I have to make a living. Right, everyone has to make a living. So what are they busy doing? They're working, right? They're working with others. They're doing, other things, whatever it is, and they're not learning, and they're not thinking in Torah. So if they're not learning and not thinking in Torah, it comes along the evil inclination goes, bam! That's when the evil inclination strikes. When does the evil inclination strike? When I'm not paying attention, right? When I'm not focused on Torah. I'm not saying it's not an evil inclination when a person learns. When a person learns, there can be an evil inclination. You can speak about sports, the weather, COVID, whatever, or what a beautiful tree, beautiful Saturn, etc., and be liable. There's an evil inclination when a person learns also. All the more so if you're not learning, you're not focused, so then you're not thinking. When you're not thinking, comes on the evil inclination, goes bam, 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 starts throwing you all kinds of things. Question is, okay, how am I going to react? What am I going to do? That's why even if a person works, person should try and be thinking in Torah, right? If it's possible, because there's an obligation to be a Torah Jew or a Torah Noahide even when you're working, right? What all of a sudden, a modest woman walks by and a person looks. Well, what happened to that, right? You gotta say, what can I do? She walked right by me. Was said to look, right? People
I'm told you're only guilty for the second look.
Who says you're allowed to join in? Right? Who says the moral imperative? I'm allowed to join in. Right? So what does evil inclination do? Evil inclination comes, speaks to your heart, helps your heart go astray, entices a person to go off the beaten track. Right? Even if a person in a million years would never go down this path, right? They would never tread over here. They would never tread water over here. But what happened? They got enticed. They got involved in something they weren't thinking. So someone will say, well, may God will cut you some slack. Right? Maybe he'll cut you some slack over here. But that's when a person's enticed the most. When you're not thinking. Right? Now, knowing the right thing to do and doing it, two different things. But a person, therefore, has to be very careful and make sure that these things do not happen. Right? They should use wisdom in some way to make sure whatever they're doing, in general, that they're also thinking about doing the right thing, about going in the right path, and make that a reality. Now, someone's going to say, listen, if I'm doing different things, I need to concentrate. I can't necessarily think in Torah. That may very well be true, right? But at the same time, I don't say, well, when I go to work and I do these other things, Torah doesn't apply. Torah's everywhere, right? Torah applies at all times.
Don't forget
when I'm working,
yeah.
when I'm working, when I'm doing other things, a person's going to say, what, Torah applies when I go shopping? Certainly does, right? You got to pay attention to what you're doing, right? You can't just sit there and bump into people. You can't cut people off the road, right? You got to pay attention to detail. You got to pay attention to what you're doing, right? Now, someone will say, well, isn't this obvious? These things should be obvious, right? Obvious, also to, to a non-Jew. So therefore, we have an obligation, 100%. We have an obligation to make this a reality through learning, through review. Many people don't like to review, right? It's not so interesting, right? Maybe even,
we need it,
somewhat boring, to a certain extent. But you have to learn, right? You have an obligation to learn, and you have an obligation to review what you learn, and you have to absolutely make it a reality. And even if a person doesn't want to be put on a higher pedestal, that doesn't matter. You're already there. If you're already there, you have to be extremely careful. You have to be really, really careful. So that's one thing. That's one thing over here. Second way of looking at this, Rabbi Yonah says, is through belief in God, through faith and belief in God. Now, what exactly does that mean? It means that we shouldn't learn from heretics, right? Someone who's a heretic, even if they tell you, today is February 6th. Well, don't believe them. Go check it out. Just because they say something, even if it's true, right? Even if it's true. Why?
Check it out.
Because of a potential negative effect. The reason is because the person reads these things that they write, even if it's something, that's neutral, like Switzerland, something that's parv in general, right? Problem is, they even if they say things that are true, the person may actually read other things they say. They may actually follow what they say. And therefore, a person's heart can be drawn after that, right? A person can say, well, I can hang out with this person. I'm just not going to learn from their actions. Now, most likely, they're going to have more of an influence on you than probably you will have on them, right? In general. So a person has to be careful, right? Because basically, any interaction a person has can have a negative effect. Now, a person's going to say, wait a minute, I work with all these unreligious people, right? So what am I supposed to do, right? Okay, you don't have a choice, right? But the idea is that, you keep speaking to them at a minimum, right? We're not interested in necessarily interacting with them. I'm not saying, just ignore them, right? You speak to them, you're cordial to them, but you don't get into any detail. You're not interested. You're not interested in what they did over the weekend. You're not interested in, what they did on Shabbos or whatever, right? You don't want to get that far. You don't want to make it that personal. Once it becomes personal, then you have to be that much careful. That much more careful. Why? Because the person is drawn after that. They're drawn after other people. The person's going to say, come on, the person's a nice person. They're very nice. They're friendly. They help you in other ways. That may all be true, right? But bottom line is, then I got to be careful. Then you have to, right? I have to separate, right? I have to have boundaries. That's the word I was looking for. I have to have boundaries. Because if I don't have boundaries, then what's the difference between me and them? Right? Well, what in the world's the difference? No difference. They do what they do. You do what you do. And then you interact with them, become friendly with them. Next thing you know, a person's dating a non-Jew. You got to say, come on, it's not going to go that far. Right? It would never go that far.
Subtlety is so weird, eh?
It's subtle, but it has an effect. A person does not realize the effect that it has on the soul. If someone, if God would open a person's eyes and they would see what the effect is, what somebody said or what they saw, what the long-term effect is, I think people will be shocked out of their gore. Right? I think they're shocked out of their mind. Because they're going to think, this didn't really affect me, this, that. And when they see the long-term effect, and they see what it does, it can only take one small thing. It doesn't have to be something major. As long as it makes a hole in the armor, right? That's all the evil inclination needs. It furrows a little hole, and the evil inclination is not going to come right out and say, I want you to desecrate Shabbos. Evil inclination is not going to do that. But once the evil inclination has a hole, and then somehow it makes the hole a little bit bigger, makes it a little bit bigger, makes it a little bit bigger, bam. Then it's only a matter of time, but it can start with something small. I'll give an example. This might be a radical example, but I'll give an example. I know a family where the son went off and grew up religious, grew up more modern, but grew up religious nonetheless. And where did it start? Where did it start with this person listening to the radio? Right? What did he listen to and was very much into? Right? Was Howard Stern. Now, then you might say, okay, that's a little bit out there. Maybe that's a little bit, using an extreme example. Okay. Right? But this is what the person was listening to. Right? And then that just carried over into other things. Right? So we started at the top. You didn't start with some smaller stuff or whatever. Right? Get into talk radio. You give us 10 minutes, we'll give you the world. Right? Maybe he was into that also. Right? But, if you tell me it's gradual and he got up to Howard Stern's one thing. I remember many years ago, that, that's where it started. Or that's one of the places where it started. Right? So, so a person will say, what, can't listen to the radio? Again, these influences have a negative effect. We're affected by what we hear. We're affected by billboards. We're affected by language. We're affected by the senses. It has an effect on the soul. A person may think not that way. Not true. Certainly not true. Right? Definitely, non-Jews are the same. Right? In this context. They're also affected. Right?
Sure,
but they don't have
everywhere.
any clue because, they don't have any clue because they're not listening to, Pirkei Avos over here. Right? They don't have a clue as why it would affect them in a negative way. Right? And why deep down, they need a snorkel in order to breathe because they're steeped in all kinds of immorality and other things. They're going to say, no, I'm not. Very easy. As you mentioned, it's very easy. I was just reading this today also. That it's very easy to pinpoint someone else's faults. Right? To pinpoint your own faults, oh, we're squeaky clean. To pinpoint someone else's faults are very easy. Very, very easy. Right? But even, but even so, we have to be realistic. And, most non-Jews out there, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter where they're holding the world, where they went to school, where they went to university, where they're working, they are affected by all this garbage also. 100%. The Roman Empire, right? Let's use the Roman Empire because America is very similar to the Roman Empire in many ways. How was the Roman Empire undone? How did they get destroyed by the Huns? Right? How did they get destroyed? They got destroyed from within through what we call decadence. That, they were immoral, did all kinds of terrible things, and they were lazy. They lived off the fat of their own reputation, and they got destroyed. They got totally destroyed, right? America's a world of hedonism, right? That's what it is. That's what the Western world is. That's what America is is the representative of the Greek world. The Greek world, the Jewish people call it darkness. They say darkness brought the Renaissance, right? Brought university learning, all these other things. Why do we call it darkness? It's darkness because it's worship of the body. It's worship of the mind, right? It's not about ethics. Totally not about that ethics. Mr. Aristotle, right? Called Mr. A, right? Mr. Aristotle, right? Did all kinds of crazy things, right? He was a womanizer among them. His students caught him one day and they said, what are you doing? What do you mean? Is Aristotle a philosopher? Because Aristotle does other things. So within Judaism, that doesn't exist, right? That doesn't go. That definitely doesn't go. Because either the Torah says something, I have to keep it, or not. Now you're going to say what? God expects us to be perfect. We have to reach, the Rabbi Chaim says, in Derech Hashem, the way of God, you have to hit a minimal level whatever that level is, to have a portion of the world to come.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We're striving in this world. We have obligations want to keep at very high levels. God says in the book of Leviticus, chapter 19, don't take revenge. Don't bear a grudge in your heart, right, against your fellow Jew. He wasn't talking to righteous people. People think, it's only for the righteous. Right? They're talking about righteous people. Talking about everybody. Right? There are high levels to reach. The closer you are to the king, you don't do what you're supposed to do. You could pay a price. You could pay a serious price. Someone will say, "With God, is that what really God expects?" I mean, someone ticks you off. You ask them for their lawnmower and say, "I'm not giving you my lawnmower. Go blow it out your ear. I'm not going to let you. I'm going to lend it to you for whatever reason." And then, okay, so you buy one, you borrow someone else, and then you happen to have a lawnmower. A guy comes back to you and says, "Can I borrow your lawnmower?" He says, "I would never give you my lawnmower because you didn't give me yours." Now, you can be justified. 100% caused you damage, caused you other things, and you can be 100% justified. Comes on the Torah and says, "I don't really care." That's called taking revenge. Does God really expect that? Right? I told the story. I was at a payphone speaking to my parents, and after a while, someone just hung up the phone. You're on the phone too long, whatever, because guy had to eat pizza, and the pizza store wasn't open. And I mentioned that this person would have come in when I was learning, and he asked to borrow a pen. I would have an obligation to give it to him, right? And if I were to say, "I'm going to give you my pen," you just hung up the phone to my parents, for goodness sakes, for pizza, you idiot. Why in the world should I give you my pen? And I'd be 100% justified, right? I'd be 100% justified. But you know what? God says that's taking revenge, and that's forbidden, right? So the question is, does God really expect me to live to that level? Yes, he does, right? He's not. The Torah wasn't given to the righteous. The Torah is given to all the Jews, right? And in the mixed multitude as well that came and converted. That's who the Torah was given to, right? So anyone who wants to convert, you're going to be held to a higher standard. As a Noahide, it's a different thing, right? They have to keep what they have to keep. Are they going to be held to a high standard like a Jew? They're not chosen over here. No offense. Membership has privileges. Then, right? American Express card, right? But you're held to a higher standard. God says you are the chosen nation. You get it right, good. You don't get it right, it's going to be serious payback depending on your level, right? Desecration of God's name for somebody at a high level could be something very minimal. Somebody else, could be 10 times worse, right? So therefore over here, right, a person, when it comes to somebody who's evil, and someone who we would consider, an absolute heretic, what are you doing hanging out with them?
Yeah.
Right? You say, "Well, I'm not learning from their actions," but you're guilty by association. You have an obligation to rebuke them even if they're not going to listen. Right? You're guilty by association even if I didn't do it. This is a pretty darn heavy standard over here. Right? Because you say, "I didn't steal. I didn't rip someone off. I didn't misrepresent. I didn't do these other things. What do you want from me?" And the answer is you're an accomplice over here. Even if you didn't do it, because look who you're hanging out with. Right? So you're going to say, "Well, vast majority of people today are heretics, even if they don't know anything." True. That is true. If I'm in the workplace, I'm working with secular people, right? I'm talking about Jews over here, right? You're working with secular people. You have to nip it in the bud. The relationship is not going to be the same, and it shouldn't be the same because the influence they're going to have, you don't hear what's coming out of their mouth. People say, "Oh, you're so stuck up," and you're so, no, it has nothing to do with being stuck up. It has to do with the fact what they say damages, right? And the stuff that comes out of their mouth is pure garbage, a lot of it, and goes against what God wants. And if it goes against what God wants, who the hell are you to listen? That's the question. Why should I listen to their drivel? Why should I listen to it? I got no obligation to listen to it. Not only that, if I think about it a little bit, it can have a negative effect on me. So I have to look out for myself.
Stain.
If I have to look out for myself, for my family, you nip conversations in the bud. That's why some people don't want to do outreach and have secular Jews over. You have no idea what they're going to say, right? You have no idea what potentially could come out of their mouth, which is true. That is very true. And see how they dress, in tattoos, and other things that could have a negative influence, right? It certainly can. I'm not saying people shouldn't necessarily do the mitzvah, if they can, right? But in general, you have to be careful. You have to be careful. We have an obligation to guard ourselves physically and spiritually, right? We have to guard our bodies. We have to take care of them, right? If you don't take care of the body, you won't take care of the soul. But I have to take care of my soul spiritually. I have to be careful what I listen to. I have to be careful what I see. I have to be careful who we interact with, right? They can have a negative effect. Because basically, and again, it doesn't matter how they grew up, even if they grew up as a potato farmer in Idaho, right? No offense, anyone who's a potato farmer, grew up in Idaho, it just means they don't know anything. Doesn't matter. What they could say is absolute poison. Now, I'll give one example. And this would be, I would say, if I had a sledgehammer, I should have used it. And the example is, now you say it's a little bit fanatical, okay, but I'll tell you why this ticked me off. And 4 years ago, more than 4 years ago now, about almost 4.5 years ago, that there were 4 righteous people that were killed in the neighborhood where I used to learn, which hopefully next coming month I'll go back to learning, right? 4 people were killed, right, by Arab terrorists, walked in a synagogue in the morning and, hacked a bunch of people to death and whatever, they were killed eventually, these terrorists, whatever. And these are 4 righteous people, very, very righteous people, right? So a secular Jew says, what a waste of life. What a waste of life. Look what they dedicated their lives to. Look what happened to them. Now, a person like that has absolutely zero respect for Torah. Now, normally I would say, somebody like that, you don't even answer. It's a waste of time to answer because they're not going to listen anyway. But someone who makes such a blasphemous statement, first of all, they have no recognition of what Torah is, or what Torah learning is, or what the purpose of Torah is, what the purpose of life is. The person, is a total ignoramus when it comes to Torah, right? Rather than anyone else, yeah, I would have taken a sledgehammer. That is the absolute chutzpah. You don't get more chutzpah than that. That in a similar way, I could say, isn't that what the students asked Rabbi Akiva as he's being flogged, as he's having his skin ripped off his body, right? Rabbi Akiva says, Talmud says, I'm bothered by the verse. When we say in the Shema, v'ahavta es Hashem Elokecha, you have an obligation to love the Lord your God, kol nafshecha, right? Kol levavcha, kol nafshecha, v'chol me'odecha. With all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. So let's get back to all your soul. Rabbi Akiva says, I was worried, says all your soul must mean I have to be waiting to give up my life. Not that you're born to want to give up your life, right? Not like the Christians say, right? But over here, I was waiting to give up my life. Now, not obviously, the other rabbis didn't agree with it, right? But he was saying, I was waiting my whole life. He got caught teaching Torah. This is the punishment, is having his flesh ripped off his body. And he's explaining, he's giving his whole sermon to his students. So his students tell him, Rabbi Ad Khan, this is what it means. This is what the verse means, right? And he said, yeah. And he said, I was bothered my whole life. He goes through the whole thing. And as he dies, he says, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Says, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And he dies. And the Talmud on that says, Rabbi Akiva is Bezuman L'chayo Amaba. Rabbi Akiva is welcome in the next world. Right? So in the sense, Rabbi Akiva's student said, what, this is what it means? This is what you have to go through? Now, this person didn't make that statement. They said, what a waste. Right? The students didn't say, oh, Rabbi Akiva, what a waste of life. Look at all the things you've done. What a waste of life. Look what you could have done. They didn't say that. They wanted to understand why he said what he said. What he meant by what he said. This other person was total lack of class over here. Right? So, total ignoramus. Had no idea what Torah is, what Torah living is, etc. Right? Somebody like that, you want to listen to what they say in general? I don't think so. Right? It's pure poison. I'm going to think it. Oh, yeah. The fact that, learn part of the day and I teach and this and that. Oh, what a waste. Look at all the suffering you've gone through. Look at all the others. What an absolute waste. Right? That's probably what they think in general. Right? Forget about what my family looks like. Forget about other things. But to say that 4 righteous people get carved up by terrorists, right? By terrorists. And they were righteous people, right? They're asking the question. They are asking the question. Zu Torah so zescharo. This is the Torah. This is the merit for learning Torah. Right? That's essentially the question. They just asked it in a vile way. In an extremely vile way. right? That's why I say sledgehammer approach. Somebody like that, if they say white is white and black is black, why in the world are you going to listen to them at all? You can say, well, you got to be respectful. If you have a choice not to hang around with such people, you don't, right? That is exactly the point, because it can make a person think, right? You can say, well, I would never think what they say. It doesn't matter, right? What they say can have an effect, right? I've heard my Rebbe say this many, many, many times, right? Many times. It says even having a normal conversation with some of these people is pure poison. Does that mean you're going to go out tomorrow and desecrate Shabbos and be a big-time leftist? No, right? It doesn't mean that. What it means is that it makes a hole in your armor. It makes you think things you would never think before. Usually. So therefore, even if someone says it, you fight against it like the plague to make sure it doesn't take root. Right? That is the purpose. And again, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter over here, even if the person is speaking the truth. In this case, they were speaking out of their elbow, right? But if they were speaking the truth, doesn't matter, right? We don't care what they're saying. We don't want their influence, right? Now, someone's going to say, that is the most fanatical thing I ever heard. Well, thank you very much, right? That may very well be, but it's to protect your spiritual soul. That is the point. And the more you hang out with such people, unless you're trying to draw them close to the Torah and you have your boundaries, it's one thing. But speaking about their stupidity and all the things that they do, which a lot of it's forbidden, I don't care how nice they are. I can find 50 million things that people do wrong against the Torah. Doesn't matter if they're the nicest people. They can still have the status of being evil, no question about it, right? But I'm not supposed to learn from them. I'm not supposed to have a connection to them, right? And even if it's family, because sometimes, you know what they say, you have to cut the biblical cord, right? Now, it's not going to be very popular either, right? But in general, if the influence is negative, right, I would tell people that, if they have, let's say, Christian family, and every time they get together, it's all about JC and whatever, you nip it in the bud. Say, listen, we're not talking about it. You're not going to convince me. I'm not going to convince you. And that's it. The conversation is not going to come up again. And if you want to bring it up, don't come, right? Now you're going to say, well, this is my brother, this is my sister, this is this. You're guarding yourself over here. You're not going to convince them. They're not going to convince you. It's a stalemate, right? They have no intention of listening. You're certainly not going to listen. What benefit can come out of it, right? So what do people say? Still one of the stupidest things I've ever heard. And that is, well, what do you call it? Family's blood. Blood is thicker than water. Yes, it is. So what? So what? The person's a heretic, blood is thicker than water. What does that mean? The person's into marriage. I should go to the wedding because blood is thicker than water? I'm not allowed to. Right? As a Jew, I'm not allowed to. Not only that, take it one step further. Right? If a person intermarries, whether it's a brother or a sister, and they die, you're not allowed to sit shiva for them. You're not allowed to mourn for them. Right? They may be buried in a Jewish cemetery, but there are no mourning customs because they cut themselves off if they didn't get divorced before. Right? That's pretty severe. That is pretty darn severe. So a parent could do that. Sibling could do that. God forbid a child could do that. Right? But there are laws that govern that. There's Jewish law over here. Right? It's not hefker. It's not ownerless. Right? So now you might say, okay, this is ethics. It doesn't say anywhere in the code of Jewish law, that listening to the words of secular Jews, is a bad thing. Not necessarily, right? Maybe not necessarily. Hanging out with them, yeah, it's brought down a lot of places, right? Hanging out with evil people. Doesn't matter if they're family or not, right? Doesn't matter. But if a person works in the workforce, this is hard. This is extremely hard because A, you got to do your job. B, you have to have a certain rapport, right, with people you work with. You can't just blow them off. That's for sure. At the same time, you're not going to have that much to do with them, right? You shouldn't have much to do with them, and you definitely should have boundaries. And you should have boundaries because their influence is poison, right? And innocuous statements, you'll say, well, this doesn't affect me. Well, this doesn't affect me. you have to keep in your mind that while you say it doesn't affect you, you don't know what's affecting your soul or not. Right? You don't know what's going to come up 2 days later, 4 days later, a month later, because the evil inclination, remember, has a ton of patience. If it doesn't get you today, it'll get you tomorrow. If it doesn't get you tomorrow, it'll get you the next day. Right? 3 months later, CFL's over. It's like, oh, CFL's going to start up, right? Right? He's going to get
last
you
year.
at some point. All right. He's going to, well, it's because it's the Bush Week. But if it would be properly professional, maybe. Right? But in the end, the evil inclination just keeps coming. It keeps coming. It keeps coming and come in many different forms. Right? It can be in the form of rabbis. Right? There are plenty of rabbis out there. You should never listen to a word they say. Right? I don't care if what they say is true or whatever. Right? I think I mentioned this before. In a certain magazine, they had an article of a rabbi was speaking about shidduchim, about matchmaking between men and women, and what you're allowed to ask, and how investigative you should be, and this and that, whatever. But this person, invited a not, top 10 tier missionary come speak in the synagogue, right? This person invited Dr. Ruth. He invited Dr. Ruth, right? A sex therapist to come speak in his synagogue, right? So when it came to this missionary, even though he's going to be a motivational speaker, and a lot of people put pressure on him not to do it. So the motivational speaker said, I'm not going to do it. I feel bad, pressure against me. I'm not going to do it. This rabbi, till this day, will say, I wanted him to speak anyway, right? I didn't care. There was nothing wrong with it. Now, even if he's not going to speak about, Christianity, whatever, you don't think he's going to hand his cards out to people? I want, my language, I want to speak out of a toilet in my synagogue. Not even a toilet. Just let it flush, right? I don't want him there. What, you couldn't find a Jewish speaker? They're going to pay him $50,000. I would have done it for 10. I would have flown in, done it for 10. Couldn't find a Jewish speaker? You want to bring a sex therapist? Yeah, I don't care if she's not speaking, in front of the pulpit, speaking in the ballroom or whatever, right, in the social room. What in the world? The modern Orthodox synagogue, for goodness sakes, bring in a sex therapist. I understand, big name value, have her come speak. I know a conservative synagogue brought in Barbara Walters. Okay, that's different. She interviewed someone, whatever. Fine. It's a conservative synagogue. You call yourselves Orthodox, you bring in a sex therapist? A little bit problematic, right? Not only problematic, people cling to what this quote unquote this rabbi says, right? Put him on the front page of a magazine. I don't care what he says. I'm not interested in what he says. If he tells me, today's February 6th, I still don't care what he says, right? Gotta watch my video, what's bogus in Boca Raton, 8-minute diatribe. Just yell scream fest, right? Against this bozo, right? Absolute bozo does such a thing, right? So you gotta be careful what you listen to. There's a lot of frauds out there, especially in the world of conversion. Maybe also, especially in the world of Noahites. A lot of frauds out there, right? So, a person has to realize, or you have to find out who's good to listen to, who's not good to listen to, right? But they can certainly lead you astray. They may mean well in many ways. I'm not saying to do it on purpose. They're not interested in necessarily leading people astray. They believe 100% what they're doing. The only problem is they're cracked. They're totally skewed. The quote unquote rabbi says, the rabbi that I asked, to allow this person to come, and even Dr. Ruth, there's probably somebody else, right? But even this missionary, quote unquote, he says, yeah, he didn't want to be named public. Of course he didn't want to be named public. Got to be an idiot. He said, yeah, I gave him permission to do it. That means you're irresponsible. You're 100% irresponsible. Give someone the ability to do such a thing. Tonight, get a magazine, puts him on the front cover. Again, I don't care what he speaks about. He can speak about mathematics. He can speak about the, Pythagoras theorem, Pythagorean theorem. Okay, right? He can prove it, show it, whatever. Am I allowed to listen to him? No. That's the whole point. You're not allowed to listen to anything these people say, even if it's true, because the influence is negative. It's going to go beyond, right? It's going to go beyond. What's forbidden here? Person's not allowed to say, I'm going to accept the correct things, like today's February 6th, right? I'm going to accept the what they say that's good, and the bad things and evil things I won't accept. Because that's what Rebbe Meir said about his Rebbe. Elisha ben Abuya, otherwise known as Acher, the other one. He was a heretic. So they asked Rabbi Meir, how could you still listen to him when he's a heretic? So he said, I peel away the layers. I take the good things that he says and I throw out the other things. Right? So according to this, that'd be problematic. Right? We're not on that level. None of us are on that level. That's why we nip it in the bud. And we don't say, oh, I'll take the good things they say, I'll knock out the bad things. Because you know what? The good things are also bad. That's the whole point. The bad even influences the good. And if it just like somebody, for example, somebody, the Torah tells me, right, I'm not allowed to lie. So the more they lie, right, this is what Rabbeinu Yonah says, the more, in one aspect, the more they lie, they have no credibility. Once they have no credibility, even if they tell the truth, no one is going to listen. Why? Because they have a track record. Once they already have a track record, they can be very popular. People could love them. But if they have a track record of doing stupid things and doing things that go against Torah, why in the world does anybody listen? So you can't say, well, he spoke about something, that was part, and what he said was probably true, and it made a lot of sense, right? But what about all the other garbage he says? What about the fact he's not bothered by the fact that he's bringing in a missionary or sex therapist? And that doesn't bother it, right? Which should be 100% forbidden, right? So I'm going to say, well, accept the good he says, and the other bad I won't, right? And the reason is because you're not allowed to rely on their knowledge, because if you rely on their knowledge, you rely on other things. You rely on other things, cause you to go astray. And a person's going to say, you know what? I know myself. I'm much stronger. Since I'm much stronger, this is never going to affect me. That's not true. Because the bigger the person, spiritually, the greater the evil inclination, but we're on a very low level in general, right? So therefore, a person will look the other way. It's going to furrow. That's the point. The evil inclination is going to furrow in. When the evil inclination furrows in, it's just a matter of time before it expands. And when it expands, you're going to say, oh, big deal. So what if this person said this? So what if this, this football player beat up his girlfriend, caught it on, they caught it on camera. I don't care. I like the way, he runs with a football. So what if Mike Tyson raped a woman? What was she doing in my room anyway at 3 a.m? Everyone knows I'm an animal, right? That's what he said. He got convicted on the stand. Idiot, right? So, people say, I don't care about that. I don't care about that because I only care about how he boxes, right? So I asked the question many, many years ago, just on this topic. If a person goes to a ball game, person goes to a football game, whatever, right? You pay the ticket, you buy souvenirs, whatever, and that's how this team is making money, right? That money's going to this player. This player is now doing X, Y, and Z. Total negative behavior. Maybe killed someone. Maybe, did something else, whatever it is. Am I liable? Right? Would I be liable for such a thing because I'm contributing? Right? That was my question. Right? And what's
90,000 fans in the stands. Yeah.
Yeah, that. Right. Right. So of course I'm not liable. Why am I not liable? Because even if some of the money's going to him from what, from fans or whatever, they buy a shirt, they buy a ticket, whatever it is, wherever the money's coming from, you help to get this person paid. I'm not telling him what to do. Right? I'm not telling Darryl Strawberry to snort coke, right? Or Doc Gooden or any of these people. I'm dating myself here, right? But they're getting paid. They're getting paid, and they're getting paid through me, right? Part of what they're getting paid is through me. Now, you tell me it's not significant, whatever, doesn't matter, right? The reality is I'm not liable. Why am I not liable? Because even if I pay him, who's telling him to use the money for that? Right? That's indirect. That's very indirect. Yeah, if it's indirect, I'm not liable. But people compartmentalize. This is the point I want to make. People do not compartmentalize. You're not allowed to say, well, I only care how he hits a baseball. I only care how he boxes. I only care how he runs with a football. Everything else doesn't matter what he does in his personal life. See, but I'm a Jew, and we don't compartmentalize. We don't say it's good enough. What he does on the field is what I want. What is off the field, I don't really care. Right? It's totally irrelevant. Now, 99.9% of the people would agree with that statement. They're not going to have an issue. They are not going to have an issue with that statement because it's a very true statement, right? They're not going to argue, right? They're not going to argue that point. They'll say, I don't care what he does off the field. Right? I don't care if he takes steroids, he does this, whatever. It doesn't matter. What matters is how he hits the ball, right? But we can't look at it that way. We have to look at the whole picture, right? And people say, people try and say, no, they're different, right? So what this person says and what they do matters, right? It absolutely matters. So the person's got to say, but I'm not influenced by what they do, right? I don't care what they do in their private life because I'm not going to do that in my private life. So you might say, okay, that may be true, but it doesn't negate the fact because these things come out, right? Since these come out, and they come out on a regular basis, even if you're not affected by it, it does have a subtle effect. It absolutely has a subtle effect. One second. So therefore, when a person gets caught up in these philosophies, right, and whatever they are, even if they say, well, I'm not going to learn from this person doing this, that, and the other thing, it can wreak havoc on a person's belief in God, shake the very core of the understanding they have about service to God, right? Because we emulate what we see. And, again, if we're younger, it's different, right? If we're older, we'll say, come on, I'm just watching the game. I'm just enjoying. I don't care what he does in the off season. But isn't it true, right? Isn't it true that you're not allowed to be violent over here? You're not allowed to cause someone damage. You're not allowed to cause a bruise to somebody. So you're not allowed to, beat up a woman, right? That should be forbidden. And he's gonna, that's death penalty for him, right? It's a non-Jew. And again, what's the person gonna say? It doesn't matter, right? And if you're younger, you're not gonna get it. If you're older, you're just gonna say it doesn't matter, right? Maybe you have some ethical bone in your body, and you say, yeah, they should throw him out of the NFL. He should never play a game again, right? We're gonna make an example. Right, because we see in the off season, if you follow the off season, it's one disaster after another, in the NFL. I think more in the NFL almost than any other sport. I could be wrong, right? But usually, after the Super Bowl, what happened? These guys are off for 4 or 5 months, whatever it is, at least till they're working out, whatever. But they're off for a certain amount of time. You hear all kinds of stories. All kinds of stories. Someone shot someone in a club. Someone beat someone up. Someone did this. Right? All kinds of things. In the off season. I'm not saying it's not by any other sport. I just think exponentially. I think football is worse in different ways. It could be because they're all most of them are probably on steroids and other things. Regardless of that. I remember one off season. There's just like one thing after another. It was like a number of years ago. Like one guy after another. It was just unbelievable. It's like, it was uncanny. So a person could say, we differentiate the action from the person, right? And Judaism says no, right? What they do, they're responsible for. And therefore, how could you respect somebody, anybody, right, who does that kind of behavior? Now, when I was growing up, I couldn't stand people that drank. They would get drunk, wasted every weekend. I just had no respect for that. I never drank casually, until I went to university, until I was in college. But I couldn't understand that, right? It didn't make sense to me, right? And, in certain ways. And the reason was because my soul was telling me that you can be, and a lot of these people were much smarter than me. Went to Ivy League schools, a bunch of them, that boggled my mind. How could they be so intelligent and be animals at the same time? And, and it finally hit me. Once I got to Torah, it finally hit me. And the answer was because they have no anchor, right? Mm-hmm. If you go in a sailboat, you can try this. Coffman's law, try this. You have no motor, right? You're going along with, with the wind, with the rudder. And what do? You take the rudder and say, okay, I'm going to try Coffman's law. I'm going to take the rudder, throw it overboard. Now, where do you end up? You just go around and around and around and around. You end up wherever the wind takes you. Now you have no direction, right? So what is that rudder? That rudder is Torah. That rudder is ethics, certainly for non-Jews.
Wow.
Right? If you don't have that anchor or that rudder, so where's morality come from? Morality is relative, right? Famous story with the Dubna Maggid. Dubna Maggid tells a story of a king. King walks into the forest, and he sees all these arrows shot in bullseye. He says, wow, I gotta find this marksman, teach my men how to shoot. And he finds the marksman and said, yeah, can you teach my men how to shoot? He goes, yeah, it's easy. So I take my bow and arrow, I shoot it in the air. When it hits a tree, I draw a bullseye around it. right? What's the parable? So that parable is, we call that bullseye morality, right? If morality is not absolute, right? This is the first of the 13 principles of Maimonides, of the Rambam, that God has to be absolute. That means there's a right and wrong. That means another one of the principles: God has the right to reward. God has the right to punish. Right. So that being the case, we cannot say morality is relative. Why? Because morality changes. Right. Give one example. Give one example. When did people in America, in the 50s and 40s, men wore hats? Right? Men wore hats. In England, you go to the races, there's still people wearing ascots, right? But men wore hats wherever they went. Why did men wear hats? Right? That was a custom, right? When did it stop? Right? It stopped by JFK. When JFK took off,
61.
Right? That's when it stopped. That's 100% when it stopped. Now, what happened? Just because he took off his hat, all of a sudden all morality changed? Right? We're living in Victorian England? No. Right? He was known to be a big-time womanizer, right? Ask Marilyn Monroe. She would tell you, right? So regardless, everybody knew things were going on. It just wasn't out in the open, as it is today. It was all under the carpet, but it was still, you think people were not immoral, and all that. So what happened over here? They talk about my parents' generation, 80 years ago, right? 70, 80 years ago. Holding hands in public was like, you get tarred and feathered. Right? Now you're talking same-sex marriages, now you're talking transgender. I mean, you see these things talk about sports, which is absolutely insane, right? Now you get transgenders, running and doing, athletic competition, in a woman's sport. They're really a guy, right? They're really a guy. If they're really
winning
a
the
guy,
medals. Yeah.
That's crazy. I remember when Caitlyn came out of the closet, right? I remember it was Bruce Jenner. Right?
I remember the Wheaties box. Yeah.
He was in the box of Wheaties. So there was a whole debate years ago when he came out of the closet. Do they take away his gold medal? It was an interesting philosophical question, right, on Sports Talk Radio. Don't ask how I knew this, right, or how I know this. But I'm not gonna incriminate myself. But in general, it was an unbelievable moral question. But what's the simple answer? Right? They're going back and forth and this and that. But what's the simple answer according to Torah? He was a guy. At that point, he was a guy. How can you strip him retroactively? You can't strip him retroactively. It doesn't make any sense. Right? At the time when he won in the Olympics, right? When he won, was he a guy or a woman? He was a guy. He was 100% a guy. If he's 100% a guy and he changes his sex 30 years later and he calls himself Caitlyn, right? He's still a guy because he is, right? He's
Chromosomes
still a guy
don't
anyway.
lie. Yeah.
But in general, we're not even going to go there. We'll keep it PG-13. But in the end, how could you strip him? Her, it, whatever. I don't even know how we got onto this. How in the world can you strip him? It doesn't make any sense because at the time he was a guy, right? So they wanted to say, take the box of Wheaties, get him off the box of Wheaties. Strip him. You can't strip him. Right? It's an interesting ethical question. Another ethical question. Look at all these guys took steroids.
Mull it over, yeah.
When they took steroids when it was permissible. Right? And now they have home run records and everything else, but they're not making the Hall of Fame. Oh, double standard. Total double standard. Right? If it was permissible, you have to let them in. If it wasn't permissible, you can't have a double standard. Right? Forget about sports. Right? In general, you can ask a million questions. You're going to be here till tomorrow, but you're never going to let me go till tomorrow. But in general, you see something like this, and it's an absolute crazy thing, right? You have somebody who's assistant secretary of health under Mr. Biden, right? Who's a transgender. Does that make any sense? It's ironic. I heard that. I just burst out laughing, right? He's assistant deputy, whatever, of health. He just happens to be a guy dressed up as a woman. Go figure. Right? And he's in health. Right? So any of these things you look at, how did I get onto this? Oh, because of my parents' generation. If you wore an earring as a guy, my parents' generation, you got a tattoo, you were trash. You were trash.
Sailor.
You were gay? Oh my. You deserve to be stuck in a closet and left there, right, to die. And all of a sudden, 30 years later, this is the norm, right? 40 years later, people coming out of the closet can't discriminate, can't this, can't that. Well, Torah says it's forbidden, doesn't matter, right? We hold it's forbidden, right? In general. So that being the case, so what happened? What happened to the standard? What happened to morality? And the answer is morality went out the window. Morality changed. And how did it change and why did it change? It changed because of the, different mores of the time. Whoever decided it, right? But it changed. Torah doesn't change. Torah morality doesn't change because God is absolute, right? Yeah, question.
Well, I think you and I started talking, Rabbi, a little bit about this before, where I was trying to mention how yesterday's solution can be today's problem, but I think you touched on the whole of the matter. I mean, I was trying to get a question in there when you were talking about how the things out there that we interact with affect us, how we see the world out there and interact with it, and it affects us. But I think it really came down to how we see it, not just what we see. You said what we see, how it affects us, but it's how we see it. And then you really brought it all the way around because if you don't have that anchor you talked about, what do you got? Because it's how you see, not just what you see. When you go to a football game, if you go there just to relax, I mean, as a B'nai Noach, I mean, if I go to a CFL game and I'm there to just relax and I chill, enjoy the game, I'm not paying attention to every, player's life. I don't know their whole history. I don't know
right,
who they are. I don't see them that way.
1 second, but what about the people around you getting smashed, and they're cursing and doing other things? You're going to say, you're there to chill. And I used to go to ball games.
You should see them in Saskatchewan.
When I was a kid, so they say, we sat in the bleachers, right? The bleachers are like, you're way far away. People are getting smashed left and right. They're like cheap tickets, whatever. Right? You go there, you see all kinds of things. That can't be positive. Right? So
No,
we can't say, well, I would never do that. But, you're right.
But how you view it does have a big effect.
But my point is that you have no idea how that affects the soul. That was my point, is that what you see, you might say, I'm there to chill.
Yeah.
You're right.
Yeah, you're right.
But if you hear people next to you cursing and you hear them saying disgusting things, I'm not saying they are, but they certainly could be, right? I'm not going to say it's the best element, the best element being there, go to Calgary and see professional wrestling, right? Or go other places. I'm not going to say it's the greatest crowd there, per se. I don't think, okay, that's sports entertainment, other sports itself, go to a hockey game. Go to a basketball game if you can afford it, because tickets are unbelievably expensive nowadays. But in general, I don't think you're coming out a choir boy. And people can disagree and say not all people are bad. They don't all say bad things. There are families there. That's true. That is definitely true. Could there be some unruly behavior? Yes. Can you hear people say things that you probably shouldn't hear or you don't want to hear? 100% normal conversation, right?
So you need Torah, for sure.
These are not people that have 120 IQs. I don't care if they're businessmen. I don't care if they're MBAs. I don't care if they're PhDs going. I put everybody together. They're all the same. Some are better than others, but I don't think it has to do with intelligence, right? The more intelligent a person is, it's like the example. Someone tells you they're Napoleon, right? The guy's 30 years old, 40 years old. He says, yeah, I'm just Napoleon incognito. So they just make it up, right? They say, yeah, I'm just in hiding, right? A 5-year-old says it, come on, your name is Beryl, you're not really Napoleon. It's like, right, I was just kidding. But someone else does it when they're older, it's justified. Why? They make things up. They say things, they say it in a fancy language. They might say it in old French, whatever it is. We know they're a fraud. We know it's not true, right? But we convince ourselves of all kinds of things. And, again, I don't think people realize what the effect is. Right? They may say this never affects me. I can't believe that's true in any way, shape, or form. I just can't believe that.
No.
Because if a person hears someone, in the vernacular, we'd say nivel peh, they swear, they curse, they say other things they shouldn't say. Go to a ball game, you hear that all the time. In the workplace, you probably hear it a lot. People curse and whatever. Right? Say, well, thank God I don't do that. A person will have a higher sensitivity, but a person cannot say they're not affected by it at all. right? That is really, that is really the point. And do I think we're 10 times worse today than we were in my parents' generation? We are worse in a certain extent. In a certain extent, we have to remember they weren't living in Victorian England either, right? It was just all put underneath the carpet, right? So they also had bad values, tremendously bad values. And certain things were cleaner. The theater was cleaner. TV was cleaner, right? In many ways. I think one of the first scenes of a man and a woman actually sleeping together was the Brady Bunch, right? You had that. They didn't show them doing anything, but they showed them like in the same bed or whatever, right? So you're talking the 70s, right? That was already in the 70s. So before that, yeah, father knows best. All these other
Leave
shows.
It to Beaver.
They're much cleaner. They're much cleaner. That's true. Does that mean the actors were and whatever? Certainly not, right? Things change. Why did they change? Doesn't really matter, right? But the point is, it's vulgar, right? A lot of this is vulgar, right? Even if I was just saying over Shabbos about Tom and Jerry, right? Tom and Jerry, right? You see Tom and Jerry, it's unbelievable violence. All the cartoons I grew up with, unbelievable violence. All these cartoons. Right, forget about the Super Friends and forget.
Bugs Bunny, yeah.
All these, you got Bugs Bunny, you got all these people. All kinds of Roadrunner, right?
Right,
Roadrunner,
Coyote.
Underdog, all these things. It's good versus evil, etc. The messages are bad. It's all about violence, right? And it hasn't got any better. Certainly not. So you're gonna say, what's so bad about watching these things? They have bad values. If they have bad values, forget about, that, all right, we're not going to talk whether they're cursing or not, whatever. We've been talking way back when, right? In the 70s, right? That they're bad values, tremendously bad values. So even as a kid, it becomes part of you. It becomes the norm. It's funny. It's entertaining, right? You'll say, okay, it's just a joke. It's funny. It's, you see Elmer Fudd get blown up
sick,
and,
sick,
whatever, all these things, right? But it's a sick mentality. Because then you become insensitive to so many things. You have an obligation to be sensitive, and you're not.
Yeah. Rabbi, this has been a wonderful class. This is why we need the ethics. We need the Torah. We need to hear the light of Torah shine. And I'm so glad that it continues to shine out of the nation of Israel. And I'm so thankful that you're willing to take the time out of your busy schedule to share with us Pirkei Avos. This is just an awesome series, and I hope it continues to grow and keep going because you might get to it by the end of the next millennium. Rabbi, you are such a blessing. And so Hashem willing, are we on for the same time next week? Because I got to wind this down to start for my next class.
We are good. There's a lot to speak about this Mishnah, and
you got worked up today.
I'll just mention, if I would think how this is going to come out, every week it always comes out different. I spoke about certain things. I was like, where'd that come from? What are you thinking about Elmer Fudd? It just happened to come out, and whatever. Speaking about over Shabbos, about cartoons and, in general. And these things are just horrific.
Well,
and people don't get it. They don't get the idea that these things, they're fun. They don't have an effect. But I think people are going to be surprised after 120 years when they see what they did and how they did things. And how their soul is affected by seeing something innocuous. Yeah. Something innocuous, they're going to be shocked out of their gourd over here because they're going to say, I can't believe that, this one innocent thing, look at how it affected other things. Yeah. I think they're going to be shocked. And that's why the Torah has to take such a strong stand and make sure you nip it in the bud because you don't want to let the inclination in at all. And even if you let it in a little bit, it's just a matter of time. Right, it's a matter of time, and we got to be careful. That's the whole point over here.
Right on. So we're gonna leave it at that, folks. Rabbi, when I was in the auto industry, my nickname was Foghorn Leghorn because I was always here to help the folks. I'm here to help you. I'm here to help you, boy.
I always love Fog. You just got the short end of the stick all the time.
Well, I don't know, but I'll tell you. We never get the short end of the stick when we hear the Torah shining out of the nation of Israel.
100%.
100%. So Hashem willing, we're going to be back next week, same time, and we hope you all join us. So till then, folks, have a wonderful, wonderful week.